I remember the smell first: white lilies and cheap champagne, floor polish and hairspray. It was the kind of smell that clings to your clothes, that follows you home and settles into your pillows whether you want it to or not. Every time I smell lilies now, my chest tightens and I am back there again, standing at the edge of a crowded banquet hall, smiling so hard my jaw ached, pretending that this was the happiest day of my life. Everyone else thought it was. The wedding looked perfect. That's what people kept telling me: perfect dress, perfect music, perfect couple, perfect family. But for me, it was the day something inside me finally broke. I stood near the back of the room, my hands folded around my purse like it might float away if I let go. I had chosen that purse carefully. Navy blue, stiff leather, sensible. A grandmother's purse. Something that said I belonged there. Something that didn't say how badly I wanted to run. My granddaughter Emily was glowing. It was the word everyone used, and it was true. She looked like light itself as she walked across the polished floor toward the altar, her white dress whispering around her legs. Her dark hair was pinned up the way she liked, with those tiny pearl clips she'd shown me months ago in my kitchen. "Grandma, do you think it's too much?" she asked, turning her head so the pearls caught the light. "No, sweetheart," I said, swallowing past the lump in my throat. "It's beautiful." I hadn't lied, she was beautiful. What I hadn't said was that I was terrified. The music swelled, something soft and instrumental, and everyone stood. Chairs scraped, cameras clicked. 1,000 tiny sounds layered over one another until my head felt full. I stood too, smoothing my cardigan, forcing my smile back into place. I could feel my heart beating in my ears, loud and uneven. This was not how weddings were supposed to feel. I had been married once, a lifetime ago. My own wedding had been small, rushed, imperfect. Folding chairs in a church basement, a borrowed veil, a cake that leaned to one side, but I remembered feeling safe. Nervous, yes, but safe. Like I was stepping into something known. What Emily was stepping into felt like fog. As she reached the front, she glanced toward the crowd, her eyes searching. For a moment, they found mine, just for a second. Her smile faltered barely, so slightly no one else could have noticed. But I did, I always noticed with her. My fingers tightened around my purse. She turned away before I could decide whether to nod or shake my head. The groom, Daniel, stood waiting, tall, clean-cut, handsome in that polished magazine way. Everyone loved Daniel. That was another thing people kept telling me. "He's such a catch," my neighbor Linda had whispered earlier, squeezing my arm. "Emily is so lucky." I'd smiled then too. I had practiced that smile in the mirror. The ceremony blurred together after that. The officiant's voice rose and fell. Vows were exchanged. Promises were made, words heavy with forever and always. Applause filled the room, loud and enthusiastic, as they were pronounced husband and wife. I clapped along with everyone else. Each clap felt like a small betrayal. At the reception, people came up to me in waves. Friends, relatives, people I barely remembered, their faces familiar but their names lost to time. They hugged me, kissed my cheek, told me how proud I must be. "You must be over the moon," someone said. "She's so lucky to have you," another added. I nodded, I smiled, I thanked them. Inside, my stomach twisted. Emily and Daniel moved from table to table, accepting congratulations. When they reached me, Emily hugged me tightly, her perfume wrapping around me like a memory. "Are you okay, Grandma?" she whispered. Her voice was warm, but there was something else there, a question beneath the question. "I'm fine," I said automatically. "You look wonderful." She pulled back, studying my face. For a second, I thought she might say more. Instead, Daniel slid his arm around her waist. "Thanks for coming," he said to me, his smile wide and easy. "We're so glad you're here." "So am I said. It sounded like a lie even to my own ears. As they moved on, I sank back into my chair. My hands were shaking now, and I tucked them under the table, pressing them against my thighs until they stilled. I told myself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Just like my doctor had taught me after my last scare. It didn't help. The speeches began. Emily's father spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. He talked about her as a little girl, about scraped knees and school plays and bedtime stories. I remembered those days too. The afternoons she'd spent at my house while her parents worked, coloring at my kitchen table, asking me endless questions about everything from dinosaurs to heaven. Then Daniel's best man stood up. Jokes, laughter. Stories that made the room roar. Everyone was relaxed now, full of food and wine, the earlier formality melting into celebration. That was when I saw it. It was small, so small that anyone else would have missed it. Daniel leaned close to Emily as the laughter died down, his hand firm on her back, too firm. He said something in her ear, something I couldn't hear. Emily's smile froze, just for a heartbeat. Her shoulders tensed, and then she laughed too, a little too quickly, a little too brightly. I felt a cold ripple move through me. I had seen that look before. Years ago in my own life, in moments I had buried so deeply I sometimes convinced myself they hadn't happened at all. The look of someone being corrected. The look of someone reminded, quietly, who was in charge. I pushed my chair back abruptly, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. A few heads turned. I murmured an apology and made my way toward the hallway, my chest tight. The restroom was empty. I locked myself into a stall and sat down hard on the closed lid of the toilet. My breath came in shallow gasps now, and I pressed my palm flat against my sternum, feeling my heart race. "You're imagining things," I whispered to myself. I had done this before. I had ignored my instincts because it was easier, because everyone else seemed so happy, because I didn't want to be the difficult one, the dramatic one, the grandmother who ruined a wedding with her worries, but the unease wouldn't leave. When I came back out, the dancing had started. The lights were dimmer now, colored and soft. Music thumped gently through the speakers. Emily and Daniel swayed together in the center of the floor, her head resting against his chest. They looked like a picture from a frame. I stood at the edge, watching. Daniel laughed, saying something, and Emily laughed too. Then his hand slid up, fingers tangling briefly in her hair. She stiffened again, just a fraction, before relaxing. My throat burned. I remembered Emily at 16, sitting at my kitchen table with tears streaking down her face after her first heartbreak. How she'd said, "I just want someone who's kind, Grandma, someone who doesn't make me feel small." I had squeezed her hands then and promised her she deserved that. Now, surrounded by music and applause, I wondered if I had failed her. The rest of the evening passed in fragments. Cake was cut, glasses were raised, the dance floor filled. People laughed and spun and sang along to songs I half recognized. I moved when I was supposed to, clapped when everyone else clapped, posed for photos with a fixed smile. Inside, I was counting minutes. When the couple finally made their grand exit, sparklers lighting the night, I stood back and watched them run through the tunnel of cheering guests. Emily's dress lifted as she moved, her laughter ringing out into the dark. For a moment, she looked back. Our eyes met again. This time, she didn't smile. The door closed behind them, and the cheering slowly faded. People began to gather their coats and purses, talking about the after party, the honeymoon, the future. I stayed where I was, my legs heavy, my heart aching. The worst day of my life had just ended, and no one else even knew it. I didn't know then how much worse things were going to get. I only knew that something precious had slipped out of my reach, and I was terrified it might already be too late to pull it back. I didn't sleep that night. The house felt too quiet when I got home, like it was holding its breath. I kicked off my shoes by the door and stood there for a long moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Sounds I had lived with for years, sounds that usually calmed me. That night, they only made the silence louder. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and didn't drink it. I sat at the small kitchen table, the same one where Emily used to do her homework, and stared at the steam curling upward until it disappeared. "You're overreacting," I told myself out loud. The words sounded thin. I went to bed after midnight, still dressed, and lay there staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly above me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's face. That moment at the end when she looked back at me without smiling. The way her eyes had searched mine, almost pleading. By morning, my head throbbed and my body felt heavy, like I'd been carrying something too large for me all night. I waited until 10 before calling her. I didn't want to seem eager. I didn't want to seem suspicious. I practiced what I would say while the phone rang. "Hi, Grandma," Emily answered, her voice bright. Relief flooded me, followed quickly by guilt for feeling it. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're feeling." There was a pause, not long. "Just long enough. I'm good," she said. "We're packing, we leave tomorrow morning." "Already?" I asked. "That honeymoon is coming fast," she laughed softly. "Yeah, Daniel likes to plan everything." There it was again, that tiny tightening in my chest. "Well," I said carefully, "I hope you're getting some rest today." "We are," she said, then added, "Daniel's here. I should go?" The call ended before I could respond. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. I wanted to call back. I wanted to say 100 things. Instead, I set it down and folded my hands in my lap. I told myself to wait, to give her space. Newlyweds deserved that. 3 days passed, then 5, then a week. Emily sent photos from the honeymoon. Beaches, sunsets, smiling selfies. Daniel's arm always wrapped around her shoulders. Everyone commented on how happy they looked. I liked each photo with a knot in my stomach. When they came back, life seemed to move on as if nothing had changed. Emily returned to work. Daniel started his new job at a finance firm downtown. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, white siding and a neat little porch. I visited once, bringing a casserole and a bouquet of daisies. Emily hugged me at the door, but it felt different now. Careful, like she was aware of someone watching. Daniel was polite, charming even. He complimented my cooking, asked about my health, called me ma'am in that respectful way that made other people melt. But I watched his eyes. I watched how he corrected Emily when she told a story slightly wrong. How his hand would settle on her arm when she spoke too long. How she would glance at him before answering certain questions, like she was checking for permission. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself times had changed, that young couples had their own rhythms, their own private jokes. I reminded myself that I was old, that I came from a generation that saw danger where there was none. Still, the unease followed me home every time. The first real crack came 2 months later. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Emily showed up at my door without calling first. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw her face through the window. Her eyes were red, her hair pulled back in a messy knot instead of its usual neat style. I opened the door and she stepped inside, her movements stiff. "Grandma," she said, her voice breaking. I didn't ask questions. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling how thin she felt, how tense her body was. She clung to me like she used to when she was small. We sat at the kitchen table again, the same one. I poured her tea this time, my hand steady despite the storm inside me. "What happened?" I asked gently. She stared into her cup for a long moment. "I don't know," she said finally. "I mean, I do, but I don't know how to explain it." I waited. "He gets angry," she said. "Not all the time, just sometimes." My heart dropped. "Angry how?" I asked. She shrugged too quickly. "He yells, says things, says I'm ungrateful, that I don't appreciate everything he does." My fingers curled around the edge of the table. "Does he ever hurt you?" The words came out before I could stop them. Her head snapped up. "No," she said immediately, too immediately. "No, Grandma, it's not like that." I nodded, even as a part of me screamed. I thought marriage would feel different," she continued. "I thought I'd feel safer." There it was, the word. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You can always come here," I said, "no matter what." Her eyes filled with tears. "Daniel says you don't like him," she whispered. I felt something cold slide down my spine. "Why would he say that?" She shook her head. "He just says you're old-fashioned, that you put ideas in my head." I swallowed hard. "I love you," I said. "That's all I put in your head." She squeezed my hand, then pulled away, glancing at the clock on the wall. "I should go," she said. "He'll be home soon." I walked her to the door, my chest aching. As she stepped outside, she turned back to me. "Please don't say anything," she said. "It'll just make things worse." I nodded, the door closed. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been. That night, I made a decision. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. I only knew that I couldn't keep pretending. I had failed once before in my life by staying silent, by telling myself it wasn't that bad, by believing that love meant endurance. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. I just hoped I wasn't already too late. I started watching more closely after that. Not in an obvious way, not in the way that would raise alarms or give Daniel a reason to tighten his grip. I watched the way a grandmother watches, quietly, patiently, pretending to be distracted while seeing everything. Emily called less often. When she did, her voice was careful, measured, like she was choosing each word from a narrow list of approved options. Sometimes I heard movement in the background, a door opening, footsteps, and her tone would shift mid-sentence. "I have to go," she'd say. "Daniel needs me, needs me." Those words echoed in my head long after the call ended. I told myself I would wait for a clear sign, something undeniable. I didn't want to accuse, I didn't want to interfere. I didn't want to become the villain in a story where everyone already saw Daniel as the hero, but the signs came anyway. It was a Thursday evening when I noticed the bruise. Emily stopped by with a bag of groceries, breathless, as if she'd rushed. She was wearing a long-sleeved sweater despite the warm weather. As she reached for a glass in my cabinet, her sleeve rode up just enough. Purple and yellow, the shape unmistakable. My heart stopped. "Emily," I said softly. She froze. I gently took her wrist, my thumb barely brushing her skin. The bruise bloomed beneath my touch like a terrible flower. She pulled away immediately. "It's nothing." My voice shook. "What happened?" She looked at the floor. I bumped into the counter. I didn't argue. I didn't say what I was thinking. I simply nodded, but something inside me hardened. That night after she left, I sat in my bedroom and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside were old papers, letters. A folded photograph of a younger version of myself, smiling with a man whose arm was wrapped around my shoulders too tightly. I had been married to Emily's grandfather for 12 years. On the outside, we had looked perfect too. He had never hit me in front of anyone. He had never raised his voice when others were around. He had been generous, admired, respected. At home, he had controlled everything: money, friends, the way I dressed, the way I spoke. He had convinced me I was lucky to have him, that no one else would want me. The first time he shoved me, I told myself it was an accident. The second time, I told myself it was my fault. By the time I understood what was happening, I felt too small to escape. I left when Emily's mother was 8 years old, taking her and nothing else. I never told anyone the truth. I told myself I was protecting my family, my reputation, my daughter. What I had really been protecting was my shame. I wasn't going to pass that silence on. The next time Emily came over, I was ready. She arrived late in the afternoon, her face pale, her eyes shadowed. She sat down heavily in the kitchen chair and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all day. "You can stay as long as you want," I said before she could speak. She looked at me, startled. "I can't, Daniel. You're an adult," I said gently. "You don't need permission." Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand." "I understand more than you think." She shook her head. "He's under a lot of stress. Work is hard. I just need to be more supportive." The words were so familiar they made my stomach turn. I reached across the table and covered her hands with mine. "Emily, has he ever scared you?" She didn't answer. Has he ever made you feel like you're walking on eggshells? I pressed. Her lips trembled. Has he ever hurt you? Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Finally, she whispered, he didn't mean to. The room seemed to tilt. I stood up slowly and walked around the table, kneeling in front of her chair so we were eye level. Listen to me, I said, my voice low but steady. No one who loves you should make you afraid. She started crying then, quiet at first, then with sobs that shook her whole body. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her the way I had when she was little, rocking slightly as she cried into my shoulder. He says I make him angry, she said between breaths. He says if I would just listen, if I wouldn't argue, it wouldn't happen. I closed my eyes, feeling both rage and grief wash over me. This is not your fault, I said firmly. Not now, not ever. She pulled back, looking at me with raw fear. If he finds out I told you, he won't, I said, and if he does, I will be right here. For the first time, she didn't argue. Over the next few weeks, we made a plan, quietly, carefully. Nothing written down, nothing said over the phone unless we were sure she was alone. She started leaving a small bag of clothes at my house. Just in case, she said, trying to smile. I kept my car fueled. I memorized the schedule of Daniel's work hours. I learned which neighbors were home during the day, who might help if things went wrong. Still, every time the phone rang late at night, my heart leapt into my throat. The call came sooner than I expected. It was just after midnight when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I answered it without looking at the screen. Grandma, Emily whispered, I need you. I'm on my way, I said, already reaching for my keys. The drive felt endless, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. When I pulled up to their house, the lights were on. I could hear raised voices even from the street. Emily was on the porch, barefoot, wrapped in a thin jacket. Her cheek was red. Her eyes were wild. I pulled her into the car and drove without looking back. She stayed with me that night, and the next and the next. Daniel called, texted, left voicemails that swung wildly between apology and accusation. Emily listened to them with a blank expression, like she was watching someone else's life unfold. This is the hardest part, I told her. It feels like drowning before you break the surface. She nodded, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. I thought we were safe. I was wrong. Because silence is dangerous, but leaving is when men like Daniel become truly unpredictable. And he wasn't done yet. Daniel showed up 3 days later. I knew it before I even opened the door. There was a pressure in the air, a tightness that settled over the house like a storm cloud. I had just finished folding laundry when the doorbell rang. One sharp press held too long. Emily froze on the couch, the color draining from her face. Go to the bedroom, I said quietly. Lock the door. She hesitated. Grandma? Now. She disappeared down the hall. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed my cardigan, and walked to the door. Daniel stood on my porch with flowers in his hand, red roses, too many of them. His smile was strained, his eyes bright in a way that set my nerves on edge. Good afternoon, he said smoothly. I was hoping we could talk. You should leave, I said. His smile faltered. I just want my wife back. She's safe, I replied. That's what matters. He laughed softly like I'd told a joke. You've always had a flair for drama. My stomach clenched. Get off my property. His jaw tightened. You don't understand what you're doing. You're confusing her, turning her against me. I'm listening to her, I said. Something you should try? For a moment, I thought he might push past me. His eyes flicked toward the hallway, calculating. Then he took a step back, forcing a sigh. I love her, he said. I make mistakes, doesn't everyone? I thought of the bruise on Emily's arm, the fear in her eyes, the way she whispered his name like it was a warning. Love doesn't look like that, I said. His face hardened. This isn't over. I think it is, I said and closed the door. My legs shook as I locked it. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with a lamp on, listening for every sound. Emily lay awake too. I could hear her pacing in the bedroom. In the morning, I called a lawyer. It wasn't easy. Every step felt like peeling back old wounds I had never allowed to heal. But the woman on the phone was calm, steady. She told me what Emily needed to document, where to go, who to call if Daniel showed up again. Emily filed for a protective order the next day. Daniel didn't take it quietly. The messages escalated. Angry, threatening, then tearful again. Promises, blame. He showed up at her workplace once, and she had to be escorted out the back. Each incident chipped away at her resolve, and each time I reminded her why she left. Some nights she curled up beside me on the couch like she used to when she was a child, her head on my shoulder. Other nights she paced, restless, guilt-ridden. I feel like I ruined everything, she said once, staring at the wall. You saved yourself, I replied. The court date came on a gray morning. Emily wore a simple dress and held my hand so tightly I could feel her pulse. Daniel sat across the room, staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched. When Emily spoke, her voice shook, but she spoke. She told the truth, all of it. The judge granted the order. Daniel didn't look at us as we left. Life didn't magically get easier after that. Healing never does. There were nightmares, panic attacks, days when Emily could barely get out of bed, days when she missed him and hated herself for it, but slowly the light returned. She went back to school, started therapy. Laughed again, real laughter, the kind that reaches the eyes. One evening, months later, we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees. Fireflies blinked in the yard. I didn't think I could survive leaving, she said softly. I didn't think anyone would believe me. I believe you, I said. I always will. She leaned her head on my shoulder. The wedding had looked happy. Everyone had seen beauty, celebration, promise. But that day had been the beginning of the hardest fight of our lives. And this quiet moment, this safety, was the ending I would protect with everything I had. The years that followed taught me something I had never fully understood before. Survival is not a single act. It is 1,000 quiet choices made every day after the danger has passed. Emily moved out of my house after 6 months. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to prove to herself that she could stand on her own again. She found a small apartment across town, above a bakery that smelled like sugar and warm bread every morning. The first time I helped her carry boxes up the narrow stairs, she laughed when she got winded. I'm really out of shape, she said, brushing hair from her face. No, I replied, you're just getting stronger. She smiled at that, and I saw a glimpse of the girl she had been before fear rearranged her life. Daniel tried twice more to contact her, once through a mutual friend, once through a letter that arrived without a return address. Emily brought the letter to me unopened, her hands shaking. I can't, she said. I don't want to hear his voice again. I took it from her, my heart steady in a way it hadn't been years ago, and tore it into pieces. We threw it away together, the divorce finalized quietly. No courtroom drama, no public spectacle, just papers signed and a chapter closed. When Emily received the final notice in the mail, she sat at my kitchen table and cried, not because she wanted him back, but because grief doesn't care about logic. It mourns what we hoped for, not what actually was. I held her through that too. Therapy became part of her routine. Some weeks were harder than others. Some sessions left her exhausted, raw, questioning everything she thought she knew about love and trust. Other weeks, she came home lighter, talking about boundaries and self-worth like she was discovering a new language. I listened. I learned alongside her. There were moments when my own past rose up unexpectedly. A smell, a tone of voice, a slammed door somewhere down the street. I realized how much I had locked away, how much of my life I had spent pretending that endurance was the same thing as strength. One afternoon, Emily asked me about her grandfather. You don't ever talk about him, she said gently. I took a long breath before answering. That's because I was ashamed. Of what? She asked. Of staying, I said. Of not leaving sooner, of thinking love meant tolerating pain. She reached for my hand. You saved Mom, you saved me? The truth settled between us, quiet and heavy and healing all at once. I began volunteering at a local support group for women. I didn't tell my story at first. I just poured coffee, arranged chairs, listened. When I finally spoke, my voice trembled, but it didn't break. Emily came with me once. She didn't speak that night. She didn't have to. Her presence alone felt like a victory. Time softened the sharpest edges. Emily started dating again, slowly, cautiously. The first time she told me about a man she liked, she watched my face carefully, afraid of my reaction. What do you feel around him? I asked. Calm, she said after thinking for a moment. I feel like myself. That's a good place to start, I told her. I didn't rush her. I didn't warn her unnecessarily. I trusted the woman she was becoming. On the anniversary of the wedding, the one that had once felt like the worst day of my life, we did something different. We took a drive out of town, just the two of us. We walked along a quiet trail near a river, the air crisp, leaves crunching beneath our feet. I used to hate this date, Emily admitted, skipping a stone across the water. It felt like a mistake stamped onto the calendar. And now? I asked. She smiled softly. Now it feels like the day everything finally changed. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. That night after she dropped me off at home, I sat alone on my couch and thought about how close I had come to doing nothing, to smiling through my fear, to convincing myself that it wasn't my place. Silence had almost cost us everything. I am an old woman now. My hands ache in the morning. I move more slowly. But there is a clarity that comes with age, a sharpness that wasn't there before. I know what matters. I know when to speak. When people tell me how beautiful that wedding was, how happy Emily looked, I simply smile. They don't need to know the truth, because the real story didn't begin that day. It began with a bruise noticed, a door opened, a car driven through the night. It began with fear and ended with choice. Emily is safe. She is whole. She laughs freely now, loves carefully, lives honestly. And I am no longer ashamed of my voice. The wedding seemed happy to everyone else. But the day she left, that was the day we finally won.